My name is Gabriel Nelson. I am 18 years old, and on the night of my birthday, I found my mother unconscious in her bedroom, barely breathing, her lips blue, her skin cold to the touch. The paramedics told me later that I had saved her life by calling 911 when I did, that if I had waited even 10 more minutes, she would have died. What they did not tell me, what I had to discover on my own over the next few weeks, was that my father had been slowly poisoning her for months, drugging her with sedatives, and waiting for the right moment when her death would look natural, explainable, tragic, but not suspicious. Also, he could collect on a $500,000 life insurance policy he had taken out on her without her knowledge. This is the story of how I realized the man who raised me was a monster, and how at 18 years old, I had to become both detective and protector, gathering evidence against my own father while keeping my mother alive long enough to prove what he was doing. It is a story about the moment you realize that the biggest danger in your life has been sleeping in the same house all along, and that sometimes becoming an adult means accepting that the people who are supposed to love you are capable of unthinkable evil. My mother's name is Catherine Nelson. She is 42 years old, a former elementary school teacher who loved her job and her students with a passion that made her the kind of teacher kids remembered decades later. She was vibrant and funny and full of energy, the kind of person who would wake up early to make elaborate birthday breakfasts or stay up late helping me with school projects. She had friends, hobbies, a life that extended beyond our family. She taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary, and every year her classroom was decorated with student artwork and inspirational posters. She ran the after-school reading club and coached the spelling bee team. She was, in every sense, alive. That was the mother I knew until about a year and a half ago, when everything started to change. It began subtly, so subtly that none of us recognized it as the beginning of something sinister. She started sleeping more, taking afternoon naps that stretched into the evening. I remember coming home from school one day in January and finding her asleep on the couch at 4 in the afternoon, something that would have been unthinkable just months before. When I woke her, she seemed disoriented, struggling to remember what day it was or whether she had eaten lunch. She complained of being tired all the time, of feeling foggy and disconnected. "It is like I am walking through water," she told me once, trying to describe the sensation. "Everything takes so much effort. Even thinking feels hard." She had trouble concentrating at work, forgetting lesson plans she had prepared the night before, losing track of conversations with colleagues mid-sentence. I got a call from her principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, asking if everything was okay at home, because my mother had missed 2 parent-teacher conferences she had scheduled and seemed confused about basic classroom procedures she had followed for 15 years. My father was deeply concerned, or at least that is what he showed us. He took her to doctors, multiple specialists, seeking explanations for her sudden decline. I remember sitting in waiting rooms with them, watching my father take detailed notes as doctors asked questions and ordered tests. They ran blood panels for everything: thyroid problems, vitamin deficiencies, Lyme disease, lupus, multiple sclerosis, early onset Alzheimer's. Nothing came back conclusive. The tests showed a healthy 41-year-old woman with no obvious physical ailments. Finally, in late March, after months of appointments and inconclusive results, a psychiatrist named Dr. Harold Brennan diagnosed her with severe depression and prescribed an antidepressant called Zoloft. Sometimes depression manifests primarily as physical symptoms, he explained to us. The fatigue, the cognitive fog, these can all be symptoms of major depressive disorder. The medication should help stabilize her mood and restore her energy levels. That was when things got catastrophically worse. My mother started the Zoloft in early April of my senior year of high school. Within 2 weeks, she was even more lethargic than before, sleeping 14 or 15 hours a day, barely able to function during the brief periods she was awake. She would come downstairs in the morning, eat a few bites of breakfast, and be back in bed by 10. She stopped being able to drive safely after nearly running a red light and not remembering how she had gotten to the intersection. She had to take a medical leave from her teaching job in May, devastating her because she loved her students and had never missed more than a few sick days in her entire career. She stopped seeing her friends, stopped participating in the book club she had been in for 10 years, stopped doing the yoga classes at the community center she had attended 3 times a week. She existed in a twilight state, moving slowly through our house like a ghost, present but not really there. When I tried to talk to her, she would struggle to follow the conversation, losing the thread of what we were discussing, sometimes falling asleep mid-sentence. My father became her primary caregiver, a role he took on with what seemed like admirable dedication. He managed her medications, bringing them to her at scheduled times throughout the day. He prepared all her meals, keeping track of what she ate and reporting it to her doctors. He helped her to the bathroom when she was too weak or disoriented to go alone, helped her shower, helped her dress. To everyone on the outside, including me, he looked like a devoted husband doing everything possible to help his sick wife through a difficult illness. But there were things that bothered me, small inconsistencies that I noticed, but could not quite articulate or understand. The way my father always insisted on being the one to give my mother her medications, never letting me help even when I offered. "These are controlled substances," he would say. "I need to keep careful track of every dose for her doctors. It is better if I handle it myself." The way he discouraged visitors, telling my mother's friends that she was too tired, too unwell, too fragile for company. She needs rest and quiet, he would tell them at the door. Maybe next week, when she is feeling better. But next week never came. She never felt better. The way her condition never improved despite all the medications and doctor visits, only steadily deteriorated month after month. Every appointment seemed to result in a new prescription, a new diagnosis, a new explanation for why she was not getting better. The depression medication was not working, so Dr. Brennan added an anti-anxiety medication. She was having trouble sleeping, so he added a sleep aid. She was having panic attacks, so he added another medication for that. By summer, my mother was taking 6 different psychiatric medications, and she could barely stay awake long enough to eat a meal. I remember one incident in July that should have been a bigger red flag than it was. I came home from my summer job at the community pool to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a pill bottle with a confused expression. She looked up at me with eyes that struggled to focus and said, "Gabriel, I do not remember taking my morning pills. Did I already take them? I cannot remember." Before I could answer, my father appeared from his office. "You already took them, Catherine. Remember? I gave them to you at 9 this morning with your breakfast." "I do not remember," she said, her voice small and frightened. "I do not remember breakfast. I do not remember much of anything anymore. That is the depression affecting your memory," my father said smoothly, taking the pill bottle from her hand. "It is one of the symptoms we have been discussing with Dr. Brennan. The medications should help with that over time." But they did not help. Nothing helped. She just got worse and worse, fading a little more each day, until by the time my senior year ended and I graduated high school, my mother was barely recognizable as the vibrant woman she had been just 18 months before. At my graduation ceremony in June, she could not sit through the entire event. My father had to take her home halfway through because she was too exhausted and disoriented to stay. She missed seeing me walk across the stage to receive my diploma. She missed the party my aunt had organized to celebrate. She spent the day in bed, unable to participate in one of the most important milestones of my life. I was 17 for most of this gradual decline, focused on my own life, in the way teenagers are, on finishing high school and applying to colleges and spending time with friends. I was worried about my mother, of course I was worried, but I trusted my father to take care of her. He was an insurance adjuster, someone who dealt with medical claims and health issues professionally every day of his working life. If anyone would know how to navigate the healthcare system and get my mother proper treatment, it would be him. He seemed so competent, so organized, so committed to her care. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way my mother would sometimes look at me with desperate, pleading eyes, like she was trying to tell me something, but could not find the words. The way she would occasionally say things like, "I do not think I am supposed to be this tired," or "something does not feel right about these medications," only to have my father immediately reassure her that these were normal side effects, that she needed to trust the doctors, that she needed to be patient with the treatment process. There was the time in August when one of her friends, a woman named Sharon who had taught with her for years, managed to get past my father and visit my mother in her bedroom. I heard Sharon crying as she left, and when I asked her what was wrong, she said, "That is not Catherine up there. That is not the woman I have known for 15 years. Something is very wrong, Gabriel. You need to get her to a different doctor. This treatment is not working. It is killing her." I told my father what Sharon had said, expecting him to take her concerns seriously. Instead, he dismissed it immediately. Sharon does not understand clinical depression. She sees Catherine struggling and thinks that means the treatment is not working. But these things take time. We have to trust the medical professionals. And I believed him, because why would I not believe my father? Why would I think he was anything other than a concerned husband trying to help his sick wife? I did not question. I did not investigate. I just accepted what I was told and focused on my own transition to adulthood, counting down the days until I could start college, until I could have some life that was not constantly overshadowed by my mother's mysterious illness. My 18th birthday fell on a Friday in September. A few weeks into my freshman year at community college, I had chosen to stay local rather than go away to school, partly because of finances, but mostly because I did not feel right leaving my mother when she was so sick. My father had encouraged me to go away, had said I should not let my mother's illness limit my opportunities, but I could not do it. Something kept me tethered to home, some instinct I could not name that said I was needed there. I spent my birthday on campus, attending classes, and then meeting up with some friends for pizza and a movie. It was a good day, normal and unremarkable in the way 18-year-old birthdays often are when you are too old for elaborate parties, but too young to go to bars. My father had called in the afternoon to wish me happy birthday, and to tell me he was taking my mother to a late doctor's appointment, that they might not be home when I got back that evening. I arrived home around 9:30, parking in our driveway, and noticing that both my parents' cars were there. The house was dark, except for a light in the upstairs hallway. I let myself in, calling out a greeting that went unanswered. The silence felt wrong, heavy with something I could not identify. I dropped my backpack by the door and climbed the stairs, my unease growing with each step. My parents' bedroom door was closed. I knocked, received no answer, knocked again. "Mom, Dad, I am home." Still nothing. I turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. My mother was lying on the bed, fully clothed in the same outfit she had been wearing that morning. Her eyes were closed, her face pale, her breathing so shallow I could barely detect it. My father was not there. I rushed to the bed, saying her name, shaking her shoulder gently. She did not respond. Her skin felt cold, clammy. When I lifted her eyelid to check her pupils, they were pinpoint small and unresponsive to the light from the bedside lamp. That was when the panic hit. This was not sleep. This was not her usual medication-induced lethargy. Something was desperately wrong. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. My mother is unconscious. She is barely breathing. I cannot wake her up. I gave them our address, described her condition, followed the dispatcher's instructions to check her airway and position her on her side. All the while, a part of my mind kept asking, where is my father? If he took her to a doctor's appointment, why is she here alone? Why did he leave her like this? The ambulance arrived within 6 minutes, though it felt like hours. Paramedics rushed up the stairs with equipment and urgent questions. What medications was she taking? Did she have any allergies? Had she taken anything unusual today? I could not answer most of their questions. I did not know what medications my father was giving her. He had always handled that privately, never involving me in the details. They loaded my mother onto a stretcher and carried her down to the ambulance. I followed, climbing into the back to ride with her to the hospital. One of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, took my mother's pulse and blood pressure, then looked at me with an expression that made my stomach drop. Has your mother attempted suicide before? What? No. She has depression, but she would never. Her vital signs are consistent with sedative overdose. Her heart rate is dangerously low. Her breathing is suppressed. Does she have access to prescription sedatives? I do not know. My father manages all her medications. He keeps them locked up. The paramedic exchanged a look with her partner that I could not quite read. We need to contact her primary care physician and get a complete list of her prescriptions. Do you know who that is? I gave them the name of my mother's doctor, Dr. Patricia Simmons, and then I called my father. He answered on the second ring, his voice casual, normal, like it was just another evening. Gabriel, how was your birthday? Dad, where are you? Mom is unconscious. We are in an ambulance heading to County Memorial. The paramedics think she overdosed. There was a pause, just a fraction of a second too long. What? What happened? I left her resting. She said she was tired after the appointment. The paramedics said her vital signs are consistent with sedative overdose. What medications have you been giving her? Just what the doctor prescribed. I cannot believe this happened. I will meet you at the hospital right away. He hung up before I could ask more questions. I sat in the back of the ambulance, holding my mother's cold hand, watching the paramedics work to stabilize her vitals, and I felt the first stirring of suspicion in my gut. Something about my father's reaction was wrong. There had been no panic in his voice, no shock, just a measured response that sounded almost rehearsed. At the hospital, my mother was rushed into the emergency room while I was directed to the waiting area to provide information to the admitting staff. I gave them everything I knew, which was frustratingly little. I did not know what medications she was taking, what doses, what her medical history included beyond the depression diagnosis. I was her son, but I realized I knew almost nothing about the practical details of her illness because my father had controlled all of that information. My father arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a folder of medical documents that he presented to the doctors with the efficiency of someone who had prepared for this moment. He had her prescription information, her doctor's contact details, her insurance cards, everything organized and readily available. He spoke to the emergency room physician with calm authority, explaining that my mother had been struggling with severe depression, that she had been on multiple medications to help manage her symptoms, that she must have accidentally taken too many pills, or perhaps intentionally overdosed in a moment of crisis. I watched him perform this role, the concerned husband dealing with a family emergency, and something felt profoundly wrong about it. He was too prepared, too calm, too ready with explanations. People whose wives are dying do not arrive at hospitals with neatly organized folders and coherent medical histories. They arrive panicked and desperate and demanding answers. But my father was none of those things. He was collected, almost clinical, like he was handling one of his insurance claims rather than his wife's life-threatening emergency. The emergency room physician, Dr. Michael Torres, took the folder and reviewed the documents, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Mr. Nelson, this lists 5 different sedative medications: Xanax, Ambien, Valium, Ativan, and Klonopin. Why would your wife be prescribed 5 different sedatives simultaneously? Different doctors prescribed them for different symptoms," my father said smoothly. "One for anxiety, one for insomnia, one for panic attacks. She sees multiple specialists. Sometimes there is overlap in prescriptions. This is dangerous overlap. These medications have cumulative effects. Taking them together could easily cause respiratory depression, loss of consciousness, even death. Was she instructed to take all of these at the same time?" "No, of course not. She must have gotten confused. Her depression has been affecting her memory and judgment. This is what I have been worried about, why I have been so careful about managing her medications. But today I had to go out, and she must have taken them without supervision." Dr. Torres did not look convinced. "We are going to need to run a full toxicology panel and contact all of her prescribing physicians to verify these prescriptions and dosages. In the meantime, we are treating this as a drug overdose. Her condition is critical but stable. We will know more in a few hours once the test results come back." I sat in the waiting room while my mother was treated, my father beside me making phone calls to relatives and friends, explaining the situation with that same calm, rehearsed tone. I listened to him tell my aunt that my mother had attempted suicide, that she had been struggling more than any of us realized, that this was a tragedy, but perhaps a wake-up call, that she needed more intensive psychiatric care. He sounded genuinely distressed, a husband at his wits' end dealing with a mentally ill spouse. But I had heard that fraction of a second pause on the phone when I first called him. I had seen how prepared he was with documentation, and I could not shake the feeling that something about this entire scenario was staged. Around midnight, Dr. Torres came back to speak with us. "Your wife is stable. We have administered activated charcoal to absorb the drugs still in her system, and we are providing respiratory support. She should regain consciousness within the next 12 to 24 hours. But Mr. Nelson, we need to have a serious conversation about these prescriptions." "Of course, doctor. Whatever you need." I contacted the primary care physician listed in your file, Dr. Patricia Simmons. She says she prescribed only one of these medications, the Xanax, at a very low dose for occasional anxiety. She did not prescribe Ambien, Valium, Ativan, or Klonopin. She says she had no idea your wife was taking multiple sedatives. My father's expression flickered, just for a moment, before settling back into concerned confusion. "That cannot be right. I have the prescription bottles. They are all from legitimate pharmacies." "The prescription bottles may be legitimate, but the question is whether they were prescribed for your wife or for someone else. The pharmacy records we pulled show that 3 of these medications were actually prescribed to you, Mr. Nelson, not to your wife. Were you giving your wife your own prescription medications?" The room felt suddenly airless. I looked at my father, waiting for his explanation, waiting for him to make this make sense. But what came out of his mouth was not an explanation. It was a lie, and I knew it was a lie even as he spoke it. I may have shared my prescriptions with her when she was having particularly bad nights and could not sleep. I know I should not have done that, but I was trying to help. I did not realize how dangerous it was. I would never intentionally hurt my wife. Dr. Torres looked at my father with open skepticism. "Mr. Nelson, giving someone else your prescription medications, especially controlled substances, is illegal. More importantly, it is dangerous. Your wife has been systematically overdosed on sedatives, likely over a period of months, based on the levels we are seeing in her bloodstream. This was not a one-time incident. This is evidence of chronic poisoning. Poisoning? Doctor, I think you are misunderstanding. I was trying to help my wife manage her symptoms. If I made mistakes, if I gave her too much, it was out of ignorance, not malice. That is something the police will need to determine. I am required by law to report suspected poisoning cases. They will want to interview both of you and review the circumstances that led to this overdose. My father's face went pale. For the first time that evening, his composure cracked. You are calling the police? Is that really necessary? This is a family matter, a medical issue. There is no need to involve law enforcement. A woman was brought in unconscious with potentially lethal levels of sedatives in her system, and there are significant questions about how those drugs were administered. Yes, we need to involve the police. They will be here shortly. Dr. Torres left, and I sat there staring at my father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the floor, his hands clasped between his knees, his jaw working like he was grinding his teeth. He looked like a man whose carefully constructed plan had just fallen apart, not like a husband relieved his wife would survive. Dad, I said quietly, what did you do? Nothing. I did nothing wrong. I was trying to help your mother. The doctor is overreacting, making this into something it is not. You were giving her your prescriptions without her doctor knowing? For how long? Gabriel, this is complicated. You do not understand how difficult it has been, trying to manage her depression, trying to keep her functioning. Sometimes I had to make difficult decisions about her care, because she was not capable of making them herself. Difficult decisions like drugging her with 5 different sedatives until she could barely get out of bed. I was helping her rest. She needed rest. The medications were for her own good. If they were for her own good, why were they prescribed to you? Why did you hide them from her real doctor? He looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. It was not guilt or remorse or fear of being caught. It was calculation. He was trying to figure out if I was a threat, if I would be a problem, if he needed to manage me the way he had managed everyone else. Gabriel, you are 18 now. You are an adult. You need to understand that sometimes in life, you have to make hard choices. Sometimes you have to do things that other people will not understand. Your mother was sick. She was getting sicker. I was doing what I thought was best. By poisoning her, I never poisoned her. I gave her medication to help her rest, to keep her calm. If I made mistakes in dosing, if I gave her too much, it was accidental. You have to believe me. But I did not believe him, because if this was accidental, why had he been so prepared at the hospital? Why did he have all the documentation ready to go? Why had he tried to convince the doctor that my mother had attempted suicide rather than being honest about giving her his medications? Every instinct I had was screaming that this was not an accident. This was something much darker. The police arrived an hour later. 2 detectives who introduced themselves as Detective Lisa Morrison and Detective James Park. They interviewed my father first, taking him to a private room for nearly 2 hours. When he emerged, he looked shaken but still composed, still maintaining his story of a concerned husband who had made regrettable but understandable mistakes trying to care for his sick wife. Then they interviewed me. Detective Morrison was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Detective Park was younger, maybe early 30s, and he took detailed notes while Morrison asked questions. Gabriel, can you tell us about your mother's illness? When did it start? About 1.5 years ago. She started getting really tired all the time, having trouble concentrating. Multiple doctors said it was depression. And who managed her medication? My dad. He kept all her pills in a locked cabinet in his office. He would give them to her according to her schedule. I was not really involved in any of that. Did you ever see what medications she was taking? No. Dad said it was important to keep them secure because some of them were controlled substances, and he did not want anyone taking them by accident. Did your mother ever complain about the medications? Say they were making her feel worse? I thought back over the past year, trying to remember. There were moments, brief lucid moments, when my mother would say she felt fuzzy, confused, like she was watching her life through a fog. I had attributed it to the depression, to the illness stealing her from us. But now I wondered if she had been trying to tell me something, and I had been too young, too trusting, too unwilling to see. She said she felt foggy sometimes, like the medications made her tired, but we thought that was just part of her condition. Gabriel, I need to ask you something difficult, Morrison said, leaning forward. Did your father ever suggest that your mother would be better off dead? Did he ever talk about life insurance or financial planning in relation to her illness? The question hit me like a physical blow. Life insurance? No. Why would he? Are you saying... I am asking if your father ever discussed life insurance policies with you. No. Never. Is there a life insurance policy? Morrison and Park exchanged a glance. We will need to investigate that. But based on what the hospital has told us, and based on your father's own admission that he was giving your mother prescription medications that were not prescribed to her, we have reason to believe this may not have been accidental. We are going to need to keep your father here for further questioning. Are you arresting him? Not yet, but we are detaining him while we gather more information. In the meantime, where can you stay tonight? Do you have family you can call? I called my mother's sister, my Aunt Rebecca, who lived about 30 minutes away. She arrived at the hospital at 3 in the morning, confused and frightened, demanding to know what had happened. I tried to explain, but the words felt surreal coming out of my mouth. Your brother-in-law has been poisoning your sister. He has been drugging her for months, maybe longer. She almost died tonight, and the police think he did it on purpose. Aunt Rebecca did not want to believe it. None of us wanted to believe it. But she took me home to her house, made up a guest room, and told me we would figure everything out in the morning. I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, my mind replaying the events of the evening over and over, seeing patterns I had missed, connections I should have made. My mother getting sicker while my father got more attentive. Her doctors finding no physical cause for her decline. My father controlling all access to her medications, to her treatment, to information about her condition. And then I remembered something. A conversation I had overheard 3 months ago. My father on the phone in his office, with his door not quite closed. He had been talking about insurance policies, about coverage amounts, about beneficiaries. At the time, I had assumed it was work-related, one of his clients discussing their policies. But what if it had not been a client? What if he had been discussing my mother's life insurance? The next morning, I went back to the hospital. My mother was awake, confused and weak, but conscious. She did not remember much of what had happened, just fragments of sensation and fear. I sat with her while Aunt Rebecca talked to the doctors, getting updates on her condition and prognosis. The toxicology report confirmed what Dr. Torres had suspected. My mother had been chronically overdosed on sedatives over an extended period. The levels in her system suggested months of regular administration, well above therapeutic doses. While my mother slept, I made a decision. If my father had done this deliberately, if he had been systematically poisoning my mother, there would be evidence. Criminals, especially methodical ones like my father who worked in insurance and understood documentation and paper trails, they always left evidence. And I was going to find it. I went home that afternoon, Using the key, I still had to let myself into the house that no longer felt safe. Everything looked normal, undisturbed, like a regular family home where nothing terrible had happened. The living room where we had watched movies together. The kitchen where my mother used to make Sunday dinners before she got too sick to cook. The stairs I had climbed thousands of times. But I knew better now. I knew that horror could hide behind ordinary facades, that monsters lived in normal houses with normal furniture and family photos on the walls. I started in my father's office, the locked room where he kept his paperwork and files. He had always been protective of this space, telling me it contained confidential client information from his insurance work that he could not let anyone see. The door was solid wood with a deadbolt, but I had spent enough time as a bored teenager watching YouTube videos about lock-picking that I could get it open in under a minute with a paperclip and some patience. Inside, the office was meticulously organized in the way my father organized everything. Filing cabinets labeled with categories typed on neat labels. A desk with nothing out of place. Every pen in a holder. Every document in a folder. A bookshelf with reference materials arranged alphabetically. My father was a methodical man. He planned. He documented. If he had planned to murder my mother, there would be records of that planning. I started with his personal filing cabinet, the one marked personal, not work-related. I searched through folders labeled with various categories: tax documents, mortgage papers, car insurance, utilities. And then I found it, a folder marked family insurance policies. Inside were policies for our cars, our home, a small life insurance policy on me that my grandparents had bought when I was born, and there at the bottom of the folder was a life insurance policy on my mother that I had never known existed. The policy was from a company called Liberty Mutual Life, and it had been taken out 18 months ago, right around the time my mother's symptoms had started. The coverage amount was $500,000, payable to my father as the sole beneficiary in the event of my mother's death from any cause. $500,000. More money than my father made in 5 years at his insurance adjuster job. 500,000 reasons to want my mother dead. My hands trembled as I photographed every page of the policy with my phone, making sure to capture every detail. The date it was issued, February of last year. The monthly premium payments, automatically withdrawn from my father's account. The beneficiary designation, crystal clear, David Michael Nelson. There was even a rider attached that doubled the payout to $1 million if my mother died before age 45, which she was. She was 42. If she had died this week, my father would have collected $1 million. But I needed more than just evidence of the policy. Life insurance by itself was not suspicious. Married couples often had policies on each other. I needed proof that he had deliberately poisoned her, not just given her medications in a misguided attempt to help. I needed to show intent, planning, premeditation. I turned to his prescription records, files he had kept documenting every medication my mother was taking. What I found was a systematic pattern of lies told to multiple doctors. He had been getting prescriptions for sedatives from 4 different physicians, none of whom knew about the others. To Dr. Brennan, the psychiatrist treating my mother, he had presented as a patient himself, claiming severe insomnia and anxiety. Dr. Brennan had prescribed him Ambien and Xanax. To a general practitioner across town, he had claimed panic attacks and received a prescription for Ativan. To another doctor, he had described symptoms of PTSD from a car accident and gotten Klonopin. To yet another, he had complained about stress-related insomnia and received Valium. Each prescription was legitimate on its own. Each doctor thought they were treating one patient for one condition. But taken together, my father had accumulated enough sedatives to keep someone in a permanent drugged state. And the dates aligned perfectly with my mother's decline. The first prescription was dated 3 weeks before her symptoms started. The accumulation of additional prescriptions matched the worsening of her condition. I found spreadsheets where he had tracked the medications he was giving her, doses that were far higher than what any single prescription recommended. He had been combining multiple sedatives at the same time, something any pharmacist or doctor would have warned against because of the dangerous interactions. He documented, when he gave her the pills, how long until she fell asleep, how long she stayed unconscious. It read like a scientific experiment, clinical observations of how much poison it took to keep someone sedated but not dead. Not dead yet. That was the key. He had been calibrating the doses carefully, keeping her alive but incapacitated for months while he waited for the right moment. A moment when her death would look like either suicide or an accidental overdose by a depressed woman who had mixed up her medications. Either way, the life insurance would pay out, and he would be the grieving husband who had done everything possible to save her. But the most damning evidence was on his computer. I knew his password because I had seen him type it hundreds of times over the years. Catherine 0415, my mother's name and birthday. The irony of using her name to password protect the computer where he planned her murder was not lost on me. I logged into his computer and searched his browsing history, his email, his saved documents. What I found made me physically ill. I had to run to the bathroom twice to throw up, my body rejecting what my mind was learning about my father. He had been researching sedative overdoses for over a year. His browsing history showed searches for lethal dose of benzodiazepines. How long does it take to die from sleeping pill overdose? Signs of accidental medication overdose versus intentional. Do life insurance companies investigate suicide? He had bookmarked articles about wives who had died from accidental medication interactions, reading them carefully, probably looking for patterns he could replicate. He had saved articles about how medical examiners determine cause of death, what evidence they look for, what would make a death look natural versus suspicious. In his email, I found draft messages to the insurance company that he had written but never sent, probably because he knew they would be too incriminating. In the event of my wife's death, what is the timeline for processing a claim? One read, if my wife dies from complications of depression and medication interactions, is that covered under the standard policy, or would it be considered suicide? He had been careful not to send these, but he had written them, revealing what he was thinking about, what he was planning. In his documents folder, I found the smoking gun, a folder titled Financial Planning 2024 that contained spreadsheets calculating various scenarios. One spreadsheet was labeled Current Financial Status and showed that we were in significant debt, credit card balances totaling $60,000, a second mortgage on the house, medical bills from my mother's treatments that our insurance had not covered. My father was drowning in debt, and his salary was not enough to dig out. Another spreadsheet was labeled Debt Relief Scenarios. It compared different options: bankruptcy, debt consolidation loans, cutting expenses. And then, in a row at the bottom highlighted in yellow, was the scenario labeled life insurance payout. The calculation showed that if my mother died and the policy paid out, he would receive $1 million because of the double indemnity rider. After paying off all debts, he would have over $800,000 left. Enough to start over, move somewhere new, live comfortably. There was another document, a timeline that made my blood run cold. It was titled Project Timeline, like it was a work document, but the milestones were chilling. Phase 1. Establish medical history of depression, complete. Phase 2. Accumulate necessary medications, complete. Phase 3. Gradually increase dosages, in progress. Phase 4. Final event, target date September. September, this month, my birthday month. He had been planning to kill her this month, and there was a draft document that was clearly meant to be a eulogy or a public statement. My beloved wife, Catherine, struggled with depression for 18 months. Despite the best medical care and the support of her family, the illness proved too much for her to bear. On the night of September 15th, she accidentally took too many of her medications and passed away peacefully in her sleep. I am devastated by this loss, but take comfort knowing she is no longer suffering. September 15th, my birthday, the night he had planned to kill her, the night I had come home early and found her unconscious and called 911. If I had stayed out just one more hour, if I had not checked on her, his plan would have worked. She would have died on my birthday, and it would have been ruled an accidental overdose, and he would have collected $1 million and played the grieving widower at her funeral. I photographed everything with shaking hands, tears streaming down my face. Every spreadsheet, every search history entry, every draft email, every timeline. I created backup copies and uploaded them to 3 different cloud storage accounts because I knew this evidence was all that stood between my father and murder. If he realized I had found this, if he had the opportunity to destroy it, there would be nothing to prove what he had done. I spent 3 hours in that office, going through every file, every document, every scrap of evidence. By the time I finished, I had a complete picture of his plan. He had spent over a year preparing to murder my mother for insurance money. He had researched methods, accumulated weapons in the form of prescription medications, created a false medical narrative that would explain her death, and calculated exactly how much money he would make from her murder. It was premeditated, planned, and would have been perfect if I had not come home early on my birthday. I photographed everything, my heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. This was not a mistake. This was not a husband making errors while trying to care for his sick wife. This was premeditated attempted murder, planned over months, executed with methodical precision. My father had decided my mother was worth more dead than alive, and he had spent a year and a half poisoning her, waiting for the moment when her death would look natural enough that no one would question it. If I had not come home when I did on my birthday, if I had stayed out just an hour longer, if I had not called 911 immediately, my mother would be dead, and my father would be collecting $500,000, playing the grieving widower, and no one would have suspected a thing. I took all the evidence to Detective Morrison that evening. She met me at the police station, and I showed her everything I had found. The insurance policy, the prescription records, the search history, the financial planning documents. She listened to everything I had to say, her expression growing harder and more determined with each revelation. Gabriel, what you have found here is evidence of attempted murder. This is not a case of medication errors or misguided caregiving. Your father planned to kill your mother for insurance money. You understand what this means. It means my father is a monster. It means I have to testify against him. It means my family is destroyed. It means your mother is alive because you were smart enough and brave enough to figure this out. Many people would not have looked, would not have questioned, would have accepted the official story. You did not. You investigated. You found the truth. That takes courage. I do not feel courageous. I feel like I want to throw up. That is normal. What you are going through. Learning this about your father, it is traumatic. But Gabriel, you need to understand something. Your father is dangerous, not just to your mother, but potentially to anyone who stands between him and what he wants. You did the right thing bringing this evidence to us. Now, we can make sure he never hurts anyone again. My father was arrested the next morning, charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and multiple counts of administering controlled substances with intent to harm. The evidence I had gathered, combined with the hospital records and witness testimony, built a case that even his expensive defense attorneys could not effectively counter. He tried to claim I had fabricated evidence, that I had broken into his office illegally, that anything I found was inadmissible. But the prosecutors argued that I was protecting my mother from imminent danger, that the evidence was discovered in exigent circumstances, and the judge agreed. The trial took place 6 months later, in late March, in the county courthouse where I had never imagined I would testify against my own father. The intervening months had been a blur of depositions, meetings with prosecutors, and watching my mother slowly recover from the poisoning while trying to process the betrayal of someone she had loved and trusted for 20 years. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim, a woman in her mid-40s who specialized in domestic violence and attempted murder cases. She had seen cases like this before, she told us during our preparation meetings, though not many. Poisoning is actually quite rare in domestic violence, she explained. Most abusers use immediate violence. But when someone uses poison, when they plan over months or years, it shows a level of premeditation and cold calculation that makes them particularly dangerous. Your father is not someone who acted in a moment of rage. He is someone who decided to kill your mother and then methodically executed that plan over 18 months. That makes him one of the most dangerous types of criminal. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The courtroom was a formal, intimidating space with wood paneling and uncomfortable benches, fluorescent lights that made everything look washed out and harsh. My father sat at the defense table in a suit, looking like the respectable insurance adjuster everyone thought he was. His defense team consisted of 2 expensive lawyers who had been hired with money he had borrowed from his parents, Thomas Blackwood and Jennifer Martinez, both partners at a large firm known for getting white-collar criminals reduced sentences. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They started with the medical evidence, bringing in Dr. Torres from the emergency room to testify about my mother's condition when she arrived at the hospital. Mrs. Nelson presented with severe respiratory depression, low blood pressure, and altered mental status consistent with severe sedative overdose. Dr. Torres testified, using a pointer to indicate charts and medical records projected on a screen for the jury. Her toxicology screen showed therapeutic to toxic levels of 5 different benzodiazepines and sleep medications: alprazolam, commonly known as Xanax, Zolpidem, or Ambien, diazepam or Valium, lorazepam or Ativan, and clonazepam or Klonopin. The combined effect of these medications was life-threatening. If her son had not called 911 when he did, Mrs. Nelson would have died within 30 to 60 minutes from respiratory arrest. Is it possible she could have taken these medications accidentally? Blackwood asked during cross-examination. It is theoretically possible, but highly unlikely. The levels in her system suggested chronic use over an extended period, not a one-time accidental overdose. Her body showed signs of long-term sedative toxicity, including muscle weakness, cognitive impairment, and metabolic changes consistent with months of excessive use. But is it possible she took them intentionally? That this was a suicide attempt? The physical evidence is not consistent with suicide. A person attempting suicide typically takes a large quantity of medication all at once, resulting in very high acute levels. Mrs. Nelson's toxicology showed moderate levels of multiple medications, more consistent with someone being given regular doses over time without full understanding of what they were taking. Next came Dr. Patricia Simmons, my mother's primary care physician, who testified about the discrepancies in my mother's treatment. I was treating Mrs. Nelson for depression beginning in March of last year, Dr. Simmons said, her voice tight with anger barely contained. I prescribed a low dose of Zoloft, a standard antidepressant, and occasional Xanax for anxiety. I was not aware she was taking any other psychiatric medications. When Mr. Nelson brought her to appointments, he never mentioned that she was taking sedatives prescribed by other doctors or that she was taking his own prescription medications. If I had known, I would have immediately stopped that treatment regimen. Combining multiple sedatives in the way Mrs. Nelson was being drugged is dangerous and potentially lethal. No responsible physician would prescribe such a combination. Did you ever prescribe Ambien, Valium, Ativan, or Klonopin to Mrs. Nelson? ADA Kim asked. Absolutely not. I would never prescribe multiple sedatives simultaneously. It is dangerous and medically unnecessary. In your medical opinion, could Mrs. Nelson's condition, her severe fatigue and cognitive impairment, have been caused by the medications she was being given rather than by depression? Absolutely. What was diagnosed as worsening depression was almost certainly iatrogenic, meaning caused by medical treatment. Mrs. Nelson was not getting sicker from depression. She was being poisoned by excessive sedatives. Remove the sedatives, as we did after her hospitalization, and her cognitive function returned to normal within weeks. That is not consistent with severe depression. That is consistent with drug toxicity. The prosecution then brought in pharmacy records, showing how my father had obtained prescriptions from 4 different doctors, lying to each one about his symptoms to accumulate sedatives. A pharmacist testified about the dangers of prescription shopping and how people with malicious intent use multiple prescribers to obtain drugs that would not be prescribed by any single physician. Then it was my mother's turn to testify. I watched her walk to the witness stand, looking so much healthier than she had 6 months ago, but still carrying the weight of what had been done to her. She wore a simple blue dress and no makeup, looking vulnerable and honest in a way that made several jury members lean forward with sympathy. ADA Kim walked her through her testimony gently, establishing her life before the illness, her career as a teacher, her relationship with my father, her vibrant health. Mrs. Nelson, when did you first start feeling unwell? It was February of last year, about 18 months ago. I started feeling exhausted all the time, like I could not wake up properly. I thought maybe I was coming down with something, the flu or mono. What did your husband say when you told him about these symptoms? He was very concerned. He suggested I see a doctor, which I did, but the tests came back normal. Then the symptoms got worse, and David, my husband, suggested I see a psychiatrist. He said maybe it was depression, that I had been under stress at work. Did you believe you were depressed? I did not feel depressed emotionally. I was not sad. I still wanted to do things. I just could not physically do them. But David and the doctor said depression can manifest as physical symptoms, so I tried to accept that diagnosis. Tell us about the medications you were taking. David managed all my medications. He kept them in his office, in a locked cabinet, because he said they were controlled substances and needed to be secure. Every morning and evening, he would bring me my pills with a glass of water. He would tell me which ones were for depression, which ones were for anxiety, which ones would help me sleep. I trusted him completely. Did you know you were taking 5 different sedative medications? No. I knew I was taking several different pills, but David said they were all prescribed by my doctors for different symptoms. I did not know they were all sedatives. I did not know that most of them were not even prescribed to me, but to David. How did the medications make you feel? My mother's voice broke, slightly, like I was disappearing, like I was sinking underwater and could not reach the surface. I would wake up in the morning already exhausted. I could not think clearly. I could not remember conversations. I could not read a book or watch a TV show because I could not follow the plot. I existed in this fog where nothing felt real. I told David something was wrong, that the medications were making me worse. But he said that was just the depression, that I needed to be patient, that the treatment would work eventually. Did you ever try to stop taking the medications? Once in July, I told David I wanted to stop everything and start over with a different doctor. He got very upset. He said that would be dangerous, that I could not just stop psychiatric medications suddenly without medical supervision. He said I could have seizures or worse. So I kept taking what he gave me. Mrs. Nelson, did you ever attempt to kill yourself? No, never. Despite how terrible I felt, despite the fog and the exhaustion and the feeling that I was losing myself, I never wanted to die. I have a son I love. I had a career I wanted to get back to. I wanted to get better, to be myself again. I never would have taken an overdose intentionally. Do you believe your husband was trying to kill you? My mother looked directly at my father for the first time during her testimony. He sat impassively at the defense table, showing no emotion. I believe my husband decided I was worth more dead than alive. I believe he spent over a year slowly poisoning me, watching me deteriorate, waiting for the moment when he could finish the job and make it look like an accident or suicide. I believe he would have succeeded if our son had not come home early on his birthday and found me dying. And I believe that if Gabriel had not been smart enough and brave enough to investigate, David would still be walking free, and I would be dead. The defense tried to shake her testimony during cross-examination, suggesting she was confused, that her memory was unreliable because of the depression and the medications, that she was being manipulated by her son who had some grudge against his father. But my mother was unshakable. She answered every question calmly, consistently, never wavering from the truth of what had happened to her. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand with my heart pounding, aware that my father was staring at me, that his entire defense was going to focus on discrediting me, on making me look like an unreliable teenager with an overactive imagination. 88 Kim established my background first, my age, my relationship with my parents, my lack of any criminal history or history of lying. Then she moved to the night I found my mother. Gabriel, tell us about your 18th birthday. I described the day, the normalcy of it, coming home to a dark house, finding my mother unconscious, the terror of that moment, calling 911, riding in the ambulance. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. When did you first become suspicious that your father had done something wrong? At the hospital, when he arrived with all this documentation already prepared, when he was too calm, when the doctor questioned the multiple prescriptions, and my father had immediate explanations. It felt wrong. It felt rehearsed. What did you do with those suspicions? The next day, while my mother was still in the hospital, I went home and searched my father's office. I found the life insurance policy, the prescription records, the computer files showing he had been planning this. Tell the jury what you found on your father's computer. I walked through the evidence, describing each document, each search history entry, each spreadsheet. The jury listened with expressions of growing horror and disgust. How did you feel when you discovered this evidence? Like my world had ended. Like the person I thought was my father did not exist. I felt sick, horrified, and terrified that if I did not act, if I did not bring this to the police, he would try again and succeed next time. During cross-examination, Blackwood came at me hard, trying to break my testimony. Gabriel, is not it true that you and your father had a difficult relationship? No, we had a normal father-son relationship. Is not it true that you resented your father for the attention he gave to your mother's illness? No, I was grateful he was taking care of her, until I realized he was poisoning her. You broke into your father's office illegally, did you not? I used my house key to enter my own home. The office door was locked, but I opened it because I needed to protect my mother. You had no warrant, no legal authority to search those files. I had a dying mother and a suspicious father. I had every moral authority to find out the truth. Blackwood tried to suggest I had fabricated evidence, that I had created false documents on the computer, that I was lying to get attention or money or to hurt my father. But the digital forensics had confirmed that all the documents I found were created by my father using his accounts from his computer over a period of months. There was no way I could have fabricated such a comprehensive trail of evidence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. My father was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for attempted murder. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not anger, not regret, but cold assessment. Even in that moment, facing decades in prison, he was calculating, planning, trying to figure out his next move. My mother and I left the courthouse together, walking out into bright sunshine that felt surreal after the darkness of the trial. She held my hand tightly. This woman who had almost been stolen from me by the man who had promised to love her. She was still recovering, still dealing with the psychological trauma of realizing that the person she had trusted most in the world had spent months trying to kill her. But she was alive, and that was everything. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for figuring it out when no one else did." "I almost did not," I admitted. "I almost just believed what Dad told me. I almost let it happen. But you did not. You trusted your instincts. You investigated. You saved my life. Gabriel, you became the parent when the parent failed. That should never have been your burden. But you carried it anyway." We went back to Aunt Rebecca's house, where we were both living while our family home sat empty, contaminated by the memory of what had happened there. We would eventually sell it, unable to live in a place where such horror had unfolded. But that day, we just sat together on the couch, mother and son, survivors of something that should never have happened. Over the next year, I learned things about my father that I had never known. His history of financial problems, debts he had hidden from my mother, his resentment that she made more money as a teacher than he did as an insurance adjuster, his belief that he deserved more from life than he had gotten. The insurance money would have solved his problems, cleared his debts, given him the financial freedom he felt entitled to, and all it cost was my mother's life. I learned that he had actually tried this before, years ago, with his first wife, my biological mother, who had died when I was 2 years old. The death had been ruled accidental, an overdose of sleeping pills. There had not been enough evidence to prosecute, and he had collected on her life insurance. Then he had met Catherine, married her, and when financial pressures mounted again, he had decided to replay the same script. If I had not been home on my birthday, if I had not questioned, if I had not investigated, I would have lost another mother to the same man, the same method, the same cold calculation that valued money over life. My mother eventually recovered, though the process was slow and painful. The sedatives had done real damage, physical and psychological. She had memory problems, coordination issues, depression and anxiety that were now real and not just manufactured by pharmaceuticals. She went through intensive therapy, dealt with PTSD from the trauma of being poisoned by someone she loved. She had to rebuild her sense of trust, her ability to feel safe, her belief that the world could be benign. But she did rebuild. She went back to teaching, part-time at first, and then full-time as her strength returned. She reconnected with friends who had drifted away during her illness, explaining what had really been happening, accepting their support and sympathy. She started a support group for survivors of intimate partner violence, because she understood now that what had been done to her was domestic violence of the most insidious kind. And I went to college, finally leaving home for a school 2 hours away where I studied criminal justice. because I had learned that evil often wears familiar faces, that monsters can look like normal people, that sometimes the only thing standing between victims and tragedy is someone willing to pay attention and ask questions. I am 20 years old now. I work part-time at a domestic violence shelter, helping people recognize signs of abuse that are not always obvious. Controlling behavior, isolation, manipulation of healthcare, financial abuse. I tell them about my mother, about how her poisoning was disguised as devoted caregiving, about how easily it could have succeeded if someone had not questioned the narrative. I think about my father sometimes sitting in prison, probably still calculating, still planning, still believing he was justified in trying to murder 2 women for money. I wonder if he ever feels remorse, or if he is just angry that he got caught. I wonder if he lies awake at night thinking about how close he came to getting away with it, how one 18-year-old with a smartphone and suspicions had unraveled his perfect plan. But mostly I think about the choice I made that night, to trust my instincts even when they led me toward terrible truths, to investigate even when it meant discovering that my father was a murderer, to gather evidence even when every piece of it broke my heart, to testify even when it meant destroying what was left of our family. I was 18 years old, fresh into adulthood, and I had to become both detective and witness against my own father. That is not something anyone should have to do. But I did it because the alternative was letting him succeed, letting my mother die, letting him get away with murder. Some people say I am a hero. I do not feel like a hero. I feel like someone who was forced to grow up too fast, who lost their innocence on their 18th birthday, who had to learn that the people who are supposed to protect you can be the ones who hurt you most. But I also feel grateful. Grateful that I came home when I did. Grateful that I questioned what I was told. Grateful that I was able to save my mother's life. My mother is alive today because I refused to accept the obvious explanation, because I looked deeper, questioned harder, gathered evidence even when it was painful. That is the lesson I carry with me. That sometimes the truth is hidden, that sometimes people lie, that sometimes you have to be willing to destroy what you thought you knew in order to protect what actually matters. I am Gabriel Nelson. I am 20 years old, and I am living proof that being young does not mean being powerless, that paying attention can save lives, that sometimes the hardest thing you will ever do is protect someone from a person they love. My father tried to murder my mother for $500,000. I stopped him with evidence gathered in one afternoon and the courage to believe what my instincts were telling me. This is my story, and it is the story of anyone who has ever had to choose between loyalty and justice, between family and truth. Sometimes becoming an adult means accepting that the people you trusted are not who you thought they were. Sometimes it means taking action that will change everything forever. And sometimes it means being the only person willing to see what everyone else has been trained to ignore. Thank you for listening to my story of growing up faster than I ever wanted to. I have left 2 more stories on your screen, both from young men who learned that sometimes becoming an adult does not happen at 18. It happens the moment your family needs you to be strong. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be forced to grow up overnight, that notification bell is waiting. Until tomorrow, remember, age is just a number, but courage defines who you really are.